3-month trip out in Darwin on one of our main vessels. So I'm from Border Protection Command. Firstly, let me tell you a little bit about what we do and what we hope to achieve in the coming years. So, in the past 3.5 years, there have been over 3,000 maritime security breaches. There have been over 3,000 boats illegally enter Australian waters, and thousands more attempted. There have been just under 20,000 people on those boats trying to enter Australia. For every one of those breaches and attempted breaches, Border Protection Command have been there. My men and my women are tired. They're overworked and under-resourced. We do an excellent job, and we could do an even better job if we received increased funding and support from the Australian government. BPC is Australia's main maritime law enforcement agency, which, in coordination with other governments, particularly the Malaysian government at this time, work to protect Australia's national interest by generating awareness of illegal activity in Australia's maritime domain. Our multi-agency task force utilises assets from the Australian Customs and Border Protection Agency, the Department of Defence and Home Affairs, and Department of Immigration and Citizenship. BPC was not established under a specific statute, so we're at the mercy of the government, and they're not responding to our needs and to Australia's needs. Australia's national interests are continually threatened by unauthorised arrivals of people. It is not Border Protection's command job to assess whether or not these people need to be let into Australia or turned away. We leave that up to our politicians. We act on government orders. Currently, those orders are to turn boats away or to help them when they're in need, but should those orders change, we'll help them as well. The Australian government, and the Australian government only, has a responsibility for the lawful and orderly entry of people into Australia. It's not our job, we just do what we're told. I might add that when humanitarian vessels such as Amnesty International and Greenpeace enter our maritime facility in an attempt to help the boats entering Australia, you make our job harder. You're an added risk to my workers and my team's security, and your liability to yourself. Border Protection Command does not want to use its resources helping you. We want to help the boats that are in the water in the first place. We have a target for increasing our maritime security and protecting Australia's national interest. However, this is only possible with a 5% funding increase in the next 12 months and a further 8% increase every year following. With this increased funding, BPC will endeavour to decrease Australian maritime security breaches by over 15% in the next 3 years. We routinely coordinate activities with other states and territories. 80% of the population of Australia is surrounded by water. So we help a lot with the other state and territories, particularly in Darwin. Like I spoke earlier, I've just come back from a mission up there. So in order to accomplish these missions and tasks, we've asked them for funding because the federal government just isn't giving it to us, but understandably they've had to decline our requests. We continue to meet with the Federal Department of Defence and show them our ongoing reports highlighting the ongoing threats to our national security and our maritime zone. I'm concerned, and I'm not quite sure how much longer our dwindling resources can stretch and how much more our exhausted workers can continue. Border Protection Command acts on behalf of approximately 26 different stakeholders to mitigate the risks posed by the continual maritime threats. We have to cooperate with and meet the needs of 26 other entities. We're spending too much time and too many resources juggling these 26 different stakeholders. The 5 key stakeholders who need to exist, many of whom I'll talk about later, are the Australian Maritime Information Fusion Centre, the Australian Maritime Security Operations Centre, the federal government, employees of BPC, and also Amnesty International. The 21 of these stakeholders that I didn't just mention, they're wound in red tape. We need the government to play more of a role in administrative management so we can increase our frontline services and not be wasting them on people sitting in an office. With the government's help, we can plan to reduce administrative red tape by 25% over the next 5 years. And we believe that by reducing this red tape and spending more money on training and implementation, we could increase our frontline services by over 30% in the next 5 years. This, in turn, would help to reduce the maritime breaches easily by 15%. We need more vessels. We need more people on those vessels, and we need it now. Every day that goes by currently presents unnecessary risks to our maritime security and to Australia's national security. These risks can easily be solved. We need increased funding and obviously increased vessels. The first 6 months of this year, we were almost broken. We were stretched beyond our limits, and there were vast areas of our maritime zone that were left unprotected and vulnerable because we just don't have enough resources. In the first 6 months of this year, there were over 4,400 people who entered the islands surrounding Australia, all of which now over capacity. It was the biggest breach of our maritime zone since 2007. The government told us in June that they would increase our presence and deploy more vessels to aid our maritime security. While Ms Gillard, we're still waiting. We realise the government's budget is stretched to its limit at the moment and we're not in the best economic position, but this needs to be paid a priority or we'll pay the price later. We understand that increased funding comes with increased responsibility, and our first duty is to frontline services. Beyond that, we think the public would appreciate more transparency and accountability to exactly where their tax dollars are going. This may include traditional communication methods, news articles, radio explanatory advertisements, or television advertisements, just to help the public understand more and feel more comfortable about what we do. Our aim is to be kept accountable at our work. Providing we have the resources to do so, we would provide weekly updates on our website as well as biannual reports welcome for the public to read. I'm sure that the government believes that they're reducing the amount of boats and with their disincentive programs, but it's not working. There are more boats than ever before, and I've seen it myself. Perhaps they should be spending more money deploying the services that they promised us 4 months ago instead of talking about it. I spoke earlier about reducing red tape. Border Protection Command has one centre which is pivotal in our work. Obviously exclude these in the red tape reduction plans. I beg for the government to look into increasing resources for the Australian Maritime Information Fusion Centre. This centre is responsible for the production and operation of tactical intelligence information regarding vessels operating in and near the Australian maritime environment. They're our nervous system. They help us to work and collate, store, analyse and redistribute information to help us detect and track threats of vessels approaching our zone. As you can imagine, the more funding they receive, the better we can assess and address the threats to our maritime security. The Australian Maritime Information Fusion Centre has the potential to give much more detailed information than what we currently receive. This information could help us create more of an integrated security picture and then have more of a direct response to the maritime threats as opposed to wandering blindly. The eyes and ears of the next group on from the Australian Maritime Information Fusion Centre is AMSOC. It's a lot easier to say. Similarly, we are asking the federal government to look at increasing funding to AMSOC, the Australian Maritime Security Operations Centre. AMSOC coordinates the planning and delivery of the current operational activity. They take information from the Fusion Centre and they communicate it to us in how best to deliver our services. Their headquarters are located within Canberra and the information gets to us as it arises. As I said, they're our eyes and our ears. In his National Security Statement to Parliament in December of 2008, the former Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, identified that protecting the integrity of Australia's border was an issue of national security. Our border protection role was reinforced in that statement, and by the announcement that we would be given additional responsibility to lead the whole of the government response to maritime people smuggling. Essentially, we were given more power and more responsibility. 4 years ago, the former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd made a commitment to us. That same government, now led by Ms Gillard, seems to have forgotten us and that commitment. In 2008, former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd also commissioned Mr Rick Smith, who's the former Secretary of the Department of Defence, to report on the best and most efficient way to coordinate Australia's overall national security arrangements. This review recommended an additional focus on threats and hazards other than terrorism, including emergency management and electronic attack by boat. With regard to border protection, the review recognised that existing arrangements were generally effective, but they could be done better. The review also identified that there was scope to streamline the legal framework that the maritime enforcement activity acts within. So that means, again, reducing red tape. The report, in summary, identified that Border Protection Command works well, but has the potential and intelligence to achieve much more than what we already do. BPC has so much potential to deliver much stronger and much better maritime security, but this can only be achieved if the federal government recognises our needs and awards us more funding. What we are asking for is realistic and achievable, especially considering the steady increase of unauthorised maritime arrivals. With a 5% funding increase in the next 12 months and an 8% increase every year after, Border Protection Command will endeavour and successfully reduce Australian maritime security breaches by 15% in the next 3 years. With the government's help, we could reduce administrative red tape. By reducing red tape, we get to increase our frontline services and we get to put more people on boats. Ms. Gillard, we need more vessels and we need them now.